Present here today, and to our viewers and listeners across the country, we look forward to future opportunities to dissect national issues, shape opinions, and make valuable inputs into public policy and governance. So on behalf of the leadership team of Media General, I welcome you all once again and look forward to a very fruitful conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you for acknowledging the presence of the General Manager News Media General. And that exactly tells us why we are here at the Accra Dialogue this evening. And now that we have seen or gotten to know the reason why we're here, let me also quickly get our partners, one of them, to quickly come in and give us some words exactly why we're here. Let me welcome the Frederick Ebert Foundation to come in, one of our partners. Let's give him a round of applause as he walks upstage.
Thank you very much, Bright. Good evening to all of you and welcome to the 4th edition of the Accra Dialogue. All protocols observed. I am Michael Adei from the Frederick Ebert Stifton, responsible for our working lines on good governance and democracy, our security policy working line, and also the traditional leadership training programs we run. That's a Young Leaders Program and the Women in Politics Training Program. I am very much happy, and let me put this on note, for us to once again connect with Professor Ahwoi, who once was a trainer for our Young Leaders Program, and equally the other speakers for this evening's event. We at Frederick Ebert Stifton believe that a democracy or any democratic state must always have opportunities like this, platforms like this, to engage on pertinent national issues. And today we are looking at Ghana's civil service. I know you have your own thoughts and reservations about our civil service, which I equally do anyway, but we need not to take the shine out of the entire discussion, so we are going to give time for our speakers to come up with their positions on what we are about to talk this evening, and then the opportunity will be given to all of us to also engage. And indeed, if you look at the panel we have here, it's a mix of those who have been in the terrain and those who have been within the corridors of academia. And so we are here to mix both theory and practicals in order to situate the entire discussion within the proper and utmost context. So I'll invite you to enjoy the discussion. Feel free to ask questions when the time is due so we can have a fruitful deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you too for welcoming us, and we'll, in the course of the program, acknowledge our distinguished guests that we have here. There are some of them you certainly will want to know they're around you. Now, we're not doing this alone with the Frederick Ebert Foundation. We also have the Institute of Law and Public Affairs. If Mauli Dake is here, if he can quickly come in, let's give him a round of applause as he walks here. One of our partners of the Accra Dialogue. This is live on radio, 92.7 on all our platforms. Welcome, Mauli.
Thank you, and good afternoon, our speakers and our guests. Mine is very simple, to simply welcome you and thank you for joining us today. We have a vibrant society, and sometimes when the issues come up, the passion gets the better of us. And we want to provide this platform to foster a higher level of discourse so that we can engage and get the best out of these issues that come up. And not just to talk, but at the end of each session of these Accra Dialogues, we have a position paper that we prepare that we share with policymakers and experts and other stakeholders. So we invite you to look at the previous ones on our website, and also look forward to this one that we'll produce after this one to help strengthen our democracy and open up our society as a strong, open society, an example on the continent. So I invite you all to join the discussion. We have big men on the panel, but we want to hear from you as well. So let's make it an interactive evening. We know there are some professors here, but we told them that we don't want lectures. So they'll keep that in mind and keep it interactive. So thank you and enjoy the evening.
Thank you to Mauli for that. And like I said, we'll acknowledge our distinguished guests that we have here. I told you earlier that this is live on TV3. We're also live on 3FM 92.7 and 3news.com. All our affiliates are picking this. Now, the topic for this evening is Very interesting. I guess even from the welcoming address, you know exactly the kind of conversation we're going to have. Executing the president mandate, the role of the civil service. As you heard from the GM of News Media General, the talk is about the executive, the presidency, but not the young man or woman who sits at the civil service and does all the technocratic work. This evening, that's what we'll talk about. Let me do a quick introduction of a guest, the minds that we have assembled to do the talking, and some of them, I'm sure all of them, very well known. Let me begin from my extreme left. He's very well known under former President Kufuor. I'm sure you saw him on TV, you listened to him on radio, all over the place he was there. Mr. Kojo Mpiani is a former Chief of Staff under former President Kufuor. Sir, thanks so much for joining us. And then under former President Mahama, he was also there. And so I guess you also saw him on TV, you listened to him on radio, and I'm sure he attended some programs that you also attended. Mr. Prosper D. Bani was a former Chief of Staff under former President Mahama. Welcome, sir. And he came back and, as we all know, turned around the fortunes of Gempa. And anytime you talk about Gempa, you cannot conclude your piece if you don't mention his name. Professor Stephen Adei is a governance expert and a former rector of Gempa. Chief, welcome once again. And if you want to talk about Ghana's local government structure, he's the only person that if you wanted real information, you can go to. He's been here with us. He's taught us all we know or we need to know about local government. Professor Ahwoi is also with us. Good evening, sir, and thanks for joining us. All right. Now that I have introduced the four minds that we have assembled, there are other guests that I'll tell you about. But first, we'll watch a short piece, and then we'll start the conversation.
The affected ministers should be called to order, especially the Minister of Finance, who has recruited staff outside the civil service to head various divisions or departments within the Ministry of Finance. We've cited issues from Ministry of Trade, from Fisheries, Ministry of Fisheries, even Ministry of Gender. But it's widespread at Ministry of Finance. The Finance Minister has publicly acknowledged the fact that he has appointed directors in the Ministry of Finance. He hasn't got that authority. It is against the Supreme Court ruling on neutrality. We want to give this advice to our ministers. It is a privilege to be a minister. It is not a right. Structures have been handed down from generations to generations. It has been tried and tested. If you think you are too wise or you are too intelligent, because of that, you cannot work within those structures, you must do the honorable thing. You must resign. Or else, the structures will kick you out.
Consider the situation where special assistants are given scholarships, training programs, and attachments meant for a ministry to study abroad instead of the serving officers in the civil and local government services. Should we keep quiet? No, no, no.
You heard heads of the civil service there talking, really letting out what they feel about the service. And that's exactly what we were hoping to hear from our guest who let us know what, in executing the president's mandate, the role of the civil services. They will do 15 minutes of talk, and they will leave the rest for you to fill in. I am compelled to begin the conversation from the way I started the introduction. So with a round of applause, help me to welcome Mr. Kojo Mpiani, former Chief of Staff under President Kufuor, as he mounts the podium.
Thank you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the Institute of Law and Public Affairs of GIMPA, as well as the Frederick Ebert Foundation for inviting me, or should I say for dragging me here to participate in the Accra Dialogue 4. You may be wondering why I'm saying dragging. I'm saying that because since I left government, I promised myself that I will not be involved in any program which may have the slightest undertones of partisan nature. But here I am being persuaded by Mr. Adei to come and attend this important function. I'm grateful to him. Ladies and gentlemen, after reading the accompanying literature, which came with my invitation, I was wondering if the invitation has not been sent to a very wrong person. The literature, in explaining the objectives of TAD, stated among other things, and I quote, "The object of the dialogue is to interrogate and harness the thoughts of leading industry experts on various thematic, topical, or pressing issues of national concern," unquote. Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not an expert. The experts, I believe, are here. My contribution today is going to be based on my observations in the working of the civil service, both in government and out of government. I'm very much aware of the large volumes of literature on the civil public service of Ghana, especially on its reforms written by the real experts. And the experts continue to research on this to help the nation have an efficient civil service. The subject of our discussion today, quote, "Executing the President's mandate, the role of the civil service," unquote. This is a very topical at this time of our development, especially as we saw on the film, taking into consideration the current heated debate about the appointment of political advisors to the office of a president and some other ministries. Ladies and gentlemen, however well-meaning plans a president has on paper, the success or failure of the president is judged not by the plans, but is judged by the execution of the plans. He is assessed to be successful if the plans are executed successfully for the benefit of the citizenry. It's a failure if he makes a mess in the execution of the plans. It is that very important that as much as one should have a great mind to dream of beautiful things and ideas, it is equally important to have a cream of intelligent and hardworking staff to bring the dreams into reality. In Ghana, as is almost everywhere else, the dreamers are presidents and governments, and the executors are the civil public service. Our Constitution, the 19th Constitution, in Articles 190 and 193, make reference to the civil service. More specifically, Section 2 of the Civil Service Act, 1993, that's the PNDC Law 327, specifically states the object of the service as, quote, "to assist the government in the formulation and implementation of government policies for development of the country. Section 3 further states that functions to include, quote, A, initiate and formulate policy options for the consideration of the government. B, initiate and advise on government plans. C, undertake the necessary research for the effective implementation of government policies. D, implement government policies. E, review government policies and plans. F, monitor, coordinate, and evaluate government policies and plans. G, perform functions that are incidental or conducive to the achievement of the objects specified in Section 2. And H, perform such other functions as the Civil Service Council may direct, unquote. It is obvious from this that the implementation of the President's mandate should, under normal circumstances, be the responsibility of the civil service. The question then is, ladies and gentlemen, is the civil service as presently constituted in a position to help the President implement his promises? We should not lose sight of the fact that a president is elected for a period of 4 years in the first instance. His ability to continue for another 4 years depends on his ability to fulfill most of his promises he gave to the people. With this in mind, if a president has any doubt about the civil service helping him achieving his objective, or as they say, to make things happen, he will go out of the service to recruit people to help him achieve his objectives. We should not forget that every politician's aim is to win elections. The president's term of office at most 8 years. Within this relatively short period, he had to implement his promises and leave his legacy for the nation. While the president's term of office is relatively short, the civil servant tenure is quite the opposite. It's akin to a monastic order where people enter on leaving the university and leave on retirement. Ladies and gentlemen, I have tried to establish the importance of a civil service in helping government or president achieve his objectives. So let me ask a question. Is the Ghana civil service as presently constituted in a position to help the president implement his policies? I shall be back to answer this question. But before then, let us first find out how all governments of this nation since its independence have recognized the importance of a very efficient developmental civil service. This observation could be gleaned from the number of commissions set up by different governments to streamline and improve the performance of the civil service in support of the development of the country. From Nkrumah with his Africanization of the public service policy, the introduction of state-owned enterprises, and the creation of parallel quasi-government institutions, the NLC-PP with the setting up of the Mills Adoi Commission, the Oko Commission set up by the NRC, the PNDC with the Chairman Committee and other reform proposals under the SAP, the NDC-1, which introduced the new civil service law and also introduced the Civil Service Performance Improvement Program, the MPP with the introduction of the Ministry of Public Sector Reform, and then NDC-2, which believed that these previous attempts at reforms all have not worked because they were based on the concept of top-down approach and therefore came with new proposals. Ladies and gentlemen, all these reforms efforts have been attempts to reorient the civil service to meet national development goals. Unfortunately, they have not worked very successfully. Let me try to answer the question I posed earlier about the state of our current civil service. In answering this question, I want to juxtapose it with what I read on the internet site of the Ghana Civil Service. On the broad heading, Understanding the Public Administration System, there is a subheading, Organization and Management, which also has a fine presentation outline under which you have another subheading, Understanding the Public Administration System, with a subtitle, Requirements of Public Servant. Under this, you have so many requirements, and I want to quote some of them. Quote, be loyal to the government of the day. 2, exhibit high integrity. 3, uphold the ethical standards. It continues with other requirements until it ends with another requirement which states, quote, in all you do, be proud to be working in the civil service of Ghana, where we aim at providing quality professional service to ensure an effective policy management for national development. This part of the nation statement is really interesting. It is great to be proud of the institution in which you work, but are they really providing quality professional service? Even though we've been told that reforms since 1957 have not been successful, but compared to 1960s and 70s, the civil service as it is today, or as it was in the not too distant past, is in a sorry state. This is my observation after being associated with the service in one way or other since 1966. But do we have to blame the practitioners alone for this state of affairs? To me, the answer is a big no. Let's take one critical cardinal principle of any good civil service: political neutrality and efficiency. My experience tells me the civil service is neither politically neutral nor efficient. Neutrality does not mean that members should not have political opinion. After all, they vote. Ladies and gentlemen, even the Electoral Commission members who supervise elections also vote. And therefore, they may have interest in one party or the other. But the civil servant is hounded because he is alleged to be a political animal aligned to A or B. The political neutrality in our civil service has been destroyed by us, the politicians. And when I say politicians, I mean both civil and military politicians. There have been too many dismissals in the service on the very wrong assumption of belonging to the other side. Such dismissals result at times in promoting juniors over seniors to head departments. These actions lead to fear and low morale in the service. Is it therefore any wonder that the service is not performing to our satisfaction? Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you two typical examples of people in public service who have to lose their job because they were alleged to be aligned to a party A or party B. The first one was the head of VRA. Here was a gentleman who has worked all his life in VRA. there was the vacancy because the head retired. The board of VRA interviewed people and recommended 3 people to the president for appointment. And our preference was Mr. A. I don't want to give names. The president invited this gentleman, spoke with him, and thought he was right, and therefore was appointed the chief executive of VRA sometime, I think, in 2007. Unfortunately for this man, there was a change of government in 2009, and he was supposed to be for the other side because he was appointed by the then president. Forgetting that in Ghana, all these appointments are made by a president. The second one, also a gentleman who worked at the Ghana Water Company. He had been recommended by his board to be made the managing director after the retirement of the then managing director. The proposal went to the president. I was part of this, so I know what really happened. There was hue and cry petitions to the president that the man must not be appointed because he was an NDC. And this came from my own people. The pressure was so much that the president called me and asked me to find out about this gentleman. So I called my colleagues and said, could you help me determine who this gentleman is? Come and tell me anything you hear about him. The next day they came and said, this is the gentleman who is working in Ghana Water Company as a deputy managing director. So I said, stop, don't do any more research on him. So I went back to my boss and said, Mr. President, this gentleman, I understand, works at Ghana Water Company as the deputy managing director. Even if he's not appointed the managing director, he is still going to work there as a deputy managing director. And if the managing director is that way, I believe the deputy will act in his place. Unless we are saying because he does not belong to us, and therefore he should lose his job as a deputy managing director. And anyway, Mr. President, the board which recommended him was a board set up by you. So the gentleman was lucky, and I was asked to inform the water company that they should give him the post. He was not a very lucky gentleman. 1.5 years after giving the post, there was a change of government. And he was tagged NPP and therefore removed from office. This is the situation we find many of civil servants. In such a situation, okay. I've been told I have 2 minutes, but I actually maybe I have more time than the 2 minutes, so maybe I'll speed up. And so this is the situation we find ourselves as a nation. Let's look at efficiency and training of the civil service again. Some years back, one cannot leave the university and enter the civil service. Before doing that, you have to attend GIMPA to understand the rudiments of how civil service works. This, I believe, is not there again. Don't let's forget that GIMPA stands for Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. So it was set up purposely to train public servants. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. I don't know what it's doing now. Fortunately, we have Professor Adei here, and therefore maybe he'll be able to let us know how they are still training civil servants. But I must confess, I was part of the group which changed it into the situation it is now. protest by civil servants against people being appointed from outside the village is not new in Ghana. And even in foreign countries, in places like UK, it's done. Civil servants always want to protect their own, and they just do not like people coming in to work there. I remember in 1969 when Professor Buzia came in, the then Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, Mr. J.H. Mensah, decided to bring in some gentlemen. And there was a hell of a protest that they are coming to supplant some people on them. These people were the late Dr. Amonikwe, the late Baswa, Mr. Kojo Mpiani, and Dr. Donko Fojo. But the minister persisted, and they were allowed to stay on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me then talk briefly on people who come from outside the civil service. This is something we cannot run away from. Every president will appoint people from outside the civil service to come and help the president. He will have to gather people around him who share his opinion. Don't let us forget that a president is not a superhuman, and she doesn't know everything. And the presidency has not been set up like a normal ministry, where at the ministry you have all sorts of officials, technical people advising the minister. The civil service you have at the office of president, they are basically administrators. But you have all the ministers and everything coming to the president. A president who is not a superhuman, how does he look at all these things and take decisions on these issues? Definitely you should have people around him, people he trusts, who can help him to determine and look at the issues coming to enable him take decisions for the benefit of the country. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's disabuse our minds about people who are coming in to work at the office of the president. It will go on, and I support that it should continue to go on. The most important thing is the balance, to make sure that you bring in people who understand what you're saying, and not too many people show to give an appearance of that trying to give job for the boys. Finally, let me end by making some recommendations on how a president should be able to have his program implemented. The first place to look at, especially, is the civil service. Even if a president decides to bring in only advisors from outside, these advisors need the civil service to help them to perform very well. And therefore, it's very, very important for us to have a very, very efficient civil service. A civil service which is politically neutral. A civil service where people will be free to give their ideas to the without fearing that they will be dismissed because they are alleged or supposed to be belonging to the other side. If we do that, I think we'll be doing something for the country. Also, that we must allow the president also to bring in the people he believes will help him in his management of the affairs of the state. Maybe what we should think of is capping the number of people the president may want to bring in. Let's look at what happens in the US, where whenever a new president comes in, everybody knows the number of appointments the president is going to make. Maybe we should learn from this and decide whether we want to do it or not. For example, we may decide to say that the president should come in with his own chief directors. And if we're able to, if we do this and agree to have something like that, I think it will go a long way in helping us in our development. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kojo Mpiani, even though you... Okay, sorry, I have to take these back. I get them back to you. Yes. Yeah. Okay. No, but you took some documents I quickly will need. Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Okay. I'm grateful. Right, another round of applause for Mr. Kojo Mpiani. Quickly, let me again remind our panelists that they have 15 minutes to speak, so that they have to run on and on. Let me quickly acknowledge the presence of the former chairman of the NPP, Mr. Paul Lafoko. He's an amazing. Grateful for your time with us. Let's give him a round of applause. And then Ambassador Leo Kran is also in our midst. Good evening, sir. Hope you're doing great. You'll be missing for some time. And then Honorable Kofi Ato, a former member of parliament, is also here. And round of applause for him. We acknowledge all our distinguished guests around here. But quickly, let me then bring in another former chief of staff under former President Mahama, Mr. Prosper Douglas Bani. A round of applause for him. You have 15 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers and all the partners for the invitation to participate in this forum. We've such distinguished panelists, Mr. Kojo Mpiani, former chief of staff, who preceded me as chief of staff in the office of the president, my professor and political mentor, Ahwoi, and Professor Adei, who also worked as a colleague in UNDP, where I spent over 16 years of my professional life. Underpinning the establishment of the civil service of Ghana is the bureaucratic theory of Max Weber, which states, and I quote, "Bureaucracy is an organizational structure that is characterized by many rules, standardized processes, procedures, and requirements, number of desks, meticulous division of labor and responsibility, clear hierarchies, and professional, almost impersonal interaction between employees," unquote. On that note, the Ghana Civil Service is capable, efficient, and a professional service which has served this country over time. I'm not saying this because of my few years in government as chief of staff and minister of interior, but because I have worked in the service as a junior staff, at that time as an executive officer at the Ministry of Finance in 1978. I also taught at the Ghana Institute of Journalism from 1983 to 1994 when I became a director of studies at the Institute. And at that time, the Ghana Institute of Journalism was a department of the Ministry of Information. And we were all subjected then to the rules and regulations and conditions of service of the civil service. You can say now that I am an offshoot of the Ghana Civil Service, and I'm proud of it. Indeed, for 16 years, I served with the International Civil Service Organization, the United Nations. So from that perspective, I think I can assess the civil service as it relates to the execution of the president's policies and programs. Whilst working abroad, my main task was on development and crisis prevention and recovery. And indeed, there is no situation where without a civil service capacity, a state can survive. And indeed, at all moments of crisis, before a country reestablishes itself politically, economically, and socially, the first responsibility of we, the advisors, to ensure that we work with the nation to reestablish the civil service because of the unique role that the public administration plays between the government and the people who the civil service are expected to serve. Having listened to my senior colleague, giving a narrative of the history of the civil service and how the service has performed, I can also say that the Ghana civil service have had its good times and also its bad times. Most of the time, the good times have coincided with the economic prospects of this country, when governments were able to provide resources to our distinguished civil servants to perform their duties. And as the earlier speaker alluded to, without proper training, without proper qualifications, there was no way you will enter the Ghana civil service. I had a colleague senior as well who told me that he was admitted, he applied to join the civil service. Soon after national service, he's got his appointment letter, and before he could enter any ministry, he had to do the 3-month course at Gimpa. Before, there was not going to be any try and error administration practice. So here we are, whilst government after government has castigated our civil servants, we must hold brave for what we own and what we have and what we have invested in over the years. From the time of Nkrumah to the current government, there is no opportunity, there is no situation where they can conclude that they cannot do or they can work without the civil servants. They cannot. They should not even try it. No government tried it, and it's not possible to work with the civil service as it's structured today, because the civil service plays an interface between the government and the delivery of service to our people. And that interface of bureaucratic expertise and professionals must be motivated, must be encouraged, must be trained to be able to perform those functions for our people. And if the politicians are in a hurry to provide the goodies for our people, they must then have a strong civil service to be able to deliver those functions. Indeed, from Kwame Nkrumah through the National Liberation Council and Buzia's regime, Liman's regime, PNDC, and then the democratic dispensations, there have been occasions where politicians, as we've heard time and time again, castigating the civil servants. But then the question is, are we clear in the rules between the civil servant and the politician? And occasions where there is the need, and it has always been the need, and there's always been action taken to fill gaps and vacuum created by the needs of government. So if you recall, Kwame Nkrumah had his own experts, and there are ministers working for him. If you take the situation of Prime Minister Buzia, he had the same experience. If you take Kutu Achampon, he had people working for him. If you take it, President Rawlings, he had people working for him. So the tendency of having people to support president and ministers to deliver their job is not new as well. However, where appointees from government begin to take the substantive positions of civil servants, then we have issues. If you want to be a civil servant, go through the civil servant programs. You need to be trained because their functions are sensitive, nervous, tricky, and dependent. So if you bring somebody for a short period to come and become director of a ministry with reference to the fundamental theory of Max Weber, which established the civil service of this country, we will be creating a situation where there will be significant dislocation between government and the people, delivery of service to the people. This, I think, should be something that we should bear in mind. Nevertheless, on certain occasions, we've had also crisis of responsibility between the political heads and the civil servants. in certain situations, we've had occasions where civil servants have become very powerful, particularly during the military regimes, where chief directors or directors became very powerful in their ministries, that they dictated the policies, the way they were formulated, and its implementation processes. One situation in one ministry which I came across, there was this chief director or the head of the administration of the ministry who was introducing the commissioner who had been appointed by Kutuya Champon. And then the director said, to his staff, ladies and gentlemen, I am the head of this ministry. I am the head of this ministry. The commissioner is only responsible for political decisions. Everything else is me. No one had the right to interface between me and the political head, except through me. That was then. You can feel the power and the significance of the chief directors or the directors. On the flip side, you come to situations where ministers have become so powerful with several advisors and special assistants that they spend sleepless nights in the ministries trying to resolve formulation of policies and rearranging implementation capacities to get the goodies to our people. The civil servant at that time will stand and watch. And that is when the description of the civil servant cannot be trusted begins to gain credence. So we have all these dynamics, and research has indicated that we have this pendulum across our political history. However, there has been occasions where the civil servant and the political leadership have worked together. All these scenarios are possible. We need to select or work towards one that is acceptable to us. Having said that, and as my earlier speaker indicated, because of the sensitivity of the civil service and the desire of government to get their policies through, reforms and reforms and reforms of the civil service had occurred. Reviews upon reviews by experts have concluded that nothing, indeed nothing, has changed. Where are we going, ladies and gentlemen? We need to find a new path to the success story that we all desire. One of the experts indicated that and I quote, whether policy making is dominated by the bureaucrats or the political elite, or by a complementary effort of both parties, it is imperative to say that, considering the magnitude and enormity of the problems confronting the country, public policy making as an activity has become very significant in shaping the destiny of this country. Public policy making, the efficiency of that process is significant to whether we get the job done or whether we fail our people. While this is a quote from Mawina Doche, whilst Doche in all his analysis posits that the solution lies in vigorous training in public policy management, I will add that to achieve this optimal environment, we need to focus on some specific actions. From my experience, and fundamentally, we need to reverse to a situation where the president's cabinet secretary doubles up as what? The head of the civil service. Because the head of the civil service supervises all the chief directors. If you take a cabinet decision, which is a policy agreement, which is managed by the cabinet secretary, And after that, the cabinet secretary ceases to follow the policy that has been agreed upon through the civil service, it stops right there. The politician will come and take the document and take it to the ministry. There is no oversight from the presidency by the cabinet secretary to see that the civil service gets the policy really formulated, implemented, and referred back to the president. There's nothing like that at this moment. And I think that that connection has to be made. While the head of the civil service is ranked as a minister, he is not presently the cabinet secretary. And that disconnect has to be addressed. We need to revert to our systematic training at GIMPA. And I would like to call on my senior chief of staff who was part of that process of dislocating that process. I think I disagree on him entirely. And I think that I want to ask the other experts to reinforce the fact that we need training at GIMPA on a regular. Indeed, GIMPA was established just to train civil servants and public servants after the Ms. Adei and Oko Commission's report. That was why the GIMPA was established. Before it was the Institute of Public Administration. But because of the specific necessity to train civil servants, it was decided that we have GIMPA. And I think that we should fall back. All civil servants, without exception, must be trained. Presidential staffers and those appointed as ministers of state at the presidency must also shed away their prejudices about the civil service being ineffective and that they can take on the whole government machinery and get things run through the system. They will face real issues. Therefore, the staffers themselves will have to be reoriented on how government business is done. Advisors and special assistants must have the necessary professional pedigree to provide targeted inputs to their ministries and not to assume functional functions and responsibilities of civil servants. Otherwise, we will have what we listened to earlier on, so that the civil servants will have its space to do the work as they are expected to do. My last point on the staffers, special advisors, and other hangers-on around ministers and government appointees is that within the current the democratic opportunity for the president to make his or her appointments, we would also want to have staffers who are of high level doing the job of the president. How do we ensure that? Coming here, I thought about how one could ensure that, but I do not have the answers. What I will propose, though, is that they must have some level of assessment. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Prosper Bani, former Chief of Staff and the former President Mahama. Let me also acknowledge the presence of Member of Parliament for the Ningo Pram constituency, Honorable Sam George. Thanks for joining us if you're around here. Now, quickly, we'll move on. I told you that this is also live on 3FM, 3news.com. It's also live on TV3 and all affiliates across the country. Our next panelist is Professor Stephen Adei, and let's welcome him as he joins us on the podium.
Good afternoon or evening. Thanks for my senior colleagues for politically senior colleagues. If you are a public servant, when they become chief of staff, they are your seniors. But in otherwise, one is my senior, one is my junior. But no comment. Two, I'm going to depart from my tests because I don't want to go over what has been said. That's the advantage of being a teacher. you can decide to do 5 minutes or 1 hour. Third, I want to say that I want to comment on two things which have come up before. The first is the cost log thing which was played, which I don't know what it was meant for, but it is very uncivil, civil servant way of doing things, and we must point it out. In any case, he singled out the Ministry of Finance, which I happen to be a member of the advisory board since 2009. I was a member of the advisory board under the previous two ministers, and I've just been appointed again as the member of the advisory board. So I've served under the three previous ones. And each one of them, for some reason, have had to come. It's a matter of a degree with their special team in certain areas. And it's too early to call to say whether how much this new one is going to do. But to have been voted the best Minister of Finance in the whole of Africa in 1.5 years means he's doing something good. And I think that has to be acknowledged. I just thought that I would say that one, and as a member of the advisory board of the Ministry of Finance, not under this government, but under the previous three governments. The second thing, by way of commenting on what has happened, has to do with GIMPA, which I happen to have led the transformation for 9 years. What people do not realize that GIMPA today is not a private institution. It is wholly owned by the government. Number two, the civil service stopped sponsoring and insisting on scheme of service training at GIMPA in 1995 under Dr. Robert Dodo. So actually, and that was 6 years before I took over. When I came and did the reform, I made sure, because I am a civil servant at the core, 35 years, national and international civil servant. Therefore, we recreated a public service school to be different from all the other departments, so that the civil service school will supervise the scheme of service training of the civil servants. And for 9 years, the civil service training school fees was not increased by a pesewa. You know, inflation in Ghana, if you do that for 9 years, it comes to almost zero in terms of real value. It was robbing Peter to pay Paul. People came for the evening classes for the top-up degrees. They paid $2,000. They came for the MBA. They paid $6,500. And being a public service school, where the salaries are controlled even by the state, I used it in literally offering free training in terms of devalued one to civil servants. They refuse to go on and go back to the civil service scheme. This is one of the tragedies, and I agree with you, of what has happened to the capacity building there. And I would be the first person. It was one of my frustrations, because I never worked in the private sector in my life. I started in the public service in Ghana, 12 years, 3 years at the Commonwealth Secretariat, 11.5 years at the UN, and came back to the public service of Ghana as head of GIMPA. I think the civil service is not doing themselves good. And especially when provision was made, because the government was not having the money to train them, to almost make civil service training virtually free. Even I extended it to parliamentarians. Every parliamentarian who came to do a master's or first degree in Ghana was dashed 50% of the fee. And every director, as from certain level up to chief director, also, when they wanted to do their masters, had a 50% fee. And I arranged with African Capacity Building, and next year will be the last. There's a free, listen, free masters in public administration for all Anglophone West Africa based in Gimpa today. And I just met a police person who said, thank you, I've had my master's free. I think that the civil servants who are talking about must go back to their scheme, build their capacity, and then the presidents will find them capable. I don't fully agree with Prosper. Yes, when I started in the civil service under Kojo Mpiani and other things, yes, it was a top one. Things now cannot be said as it was. And it is in the interest, and I agree with you, for the presidency, the governments, and the civil service themselves to come together to build the capacity of the civil service, because there's a certain capacity of the civil service. If it is not there, no matter whether you are NDC or NPP, you will suffer. Now let me go to a few points, because I don't want to follow my colleagues to exceed the time. Should we say to distinguish between professors and politicians? We will watch our time. I'm sure my boss, Kojo Mpiani, knew that it was coming. I think that the civil servants themselves, first and foremost, must do their constitutional responsibility, which was read. For example, can we go to any civil service today and say that before and always when they come, you say in tree, or Ahwoi potri, so a stranger's eyes are big, but it doesn't see much. If I am head of the Ministry of Finance, or I'm head of the Ministry of Agriculture, whilst they are thinking about 3 months before they have their cabinet sorted out, I will have gone through the whole manifesto, worked out the implications, what are to be done. When the minister is appointed that day, I meet with the minister. You know, I had been appointed to go as UN ambassador to Namibia when Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was appointed head of African Bureau of UNDP. Somebody did me either as service or disservice. Service because he was one of the most great people to work under. Disservice because he delayed my becoming an ambassador of the UN for 3 years. It came eventually. I was UN ambassador to South Africa and Namibia. And he said that, I've heard that you can help me. Stephen, will you do me a favor? Will you give me 1 year service before you go? What can you do to an African lady of that stature? I said, yes. I briefed her and other things, and I ended up serving her for 3 years. So there is certain thing, endearment, which should come from the civil service. And let me tell you, when you do so and the politician sees that you are there to help them to succeed, they will trust you. And that, we must be very fair about that. Again, sorry for coming to the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Foriata has kept the same chief director, one of the most brilliant guys, Numo, there. He has appointed from within the director of budget, not from outside. Head of policy. He found somebody there. He's the head of policy. But he is talking about Ghana beyond aid and few other things. He will bring somebody who has been part of the thinking. That balance. And that leads to a few suggestions, and then I will end so that I will respond to questions thereafter. I have suggested a few things as the way forward. We are in the presidential system. In the Fourth Republic, for better or for worse, it hasn't been changed. The presidents come with mandate, and no president will allow anybody, perceived or otherwise, to undermine their mandate. That must be accepted by a civil servant. And that's why proactivity on the civil servants to show that they are there to help you to succeed will be important. Again, it must be the other side appreciate that no presidential appointees or ministerial appointees can ever take over the whole function of the civil service. You can't. There's therefore the need as a nation for us to define, as to a large extent the Americans have done, which positions a minister can come with the president and go with. I personally think that a typical minister will should be allowed to come with about 5 experts whom he will go with, but then they will come and work with the bureaucracy. And not to say that, no, we are there, we must execute your function. The question is that, is the minister going to sit down every day to explain what he wants to everybody? He can't. Somebody must interface. I believe that, assuming we have even, and I'm going for very serious waters, one of the largest ministerial appointments in our history by Akufo-Addo of 110. No comment further. And each one of them, and of course they are not all ministries. There are about only 35 of them. The 35 has 5 experts, not political appointees, coming with a minister. You are having about 150 to 200 people. And if the Ghana Civil Service of 400,000 thereabout cannot accommodate a presidential team, I'm not talking about the president's office, of about 250, I think that we are saying that you go for your election, we will manage how you survive, and no president will agree. We must therefore define that level, what positions, and then the bickering would stop. Honorable Furiata has not appointed 10 people out of 500. 500 Ministry of Finance employees. And you say that, look, you should allow us to do it. No, he won't allow you. Why? Because he has a mandate to deliver. Tekwe had a mandate, and Dufo had a mandate. Second, I think that the bureaucrats and the politicians should take clue of the dichotomy between 4 years and permanency. And we should work out the details of what it is. I think that the real problem has to do with mistrust between the bureaucracy and the politicians on both sides. And that must be worked at. And I believe, quite interestingly, and I have one point and I end, when I was turning the curve at Kanda, there was unusual traffic. Someone selling paper came. Are you Professor there? I said, yeah. Why is it that when this government came, you have not been criticizing it? And I said, I ask, which one should I criticize? What is somebody is saying true because you are untrue? First of all, listen carefully. For 2 years under Mahama, I never made a statement. Why? Because I know it's difficult to govern. And the statement I made, which I still stand by, were 3. That at a certain point, he has led Ghana down on quality of leadership. You may agree or disagree, but professional, that's what I came to. 2, I think that corruption, which has been with us, was on the ascendancy. And thirdly, I felt that some appointments were wrong and not in the interest of Ghana. But I never opened my mouth for 2 years. Let Akufo-Addo do the same. And some citizen vigilantes will talk, but I will never talk in the first year of a government trying to find its feet with an agenda which I myself have to understand. Finally, I just commented on that because of what somebody said there. Because in Ghana, there should be statements who are neither NDC nor MPP, but put Ghana first. Some of us have chosen to be that. That's why we have never gotten any political job. Lastly, I believe that it is important for the civil service in certain areas, because there are certain areas there have been no political interference. Issuing of passports. In fact, we forget that the police service is a public service. Other things. These areas, the ordinary citizen is unhappy. And if an ordinary citizen is unhappy about their passports, about land registration, about clearing things at the port, you wouldn't expect all of us having culprits not paying our revenues. Any government which is serious would like to do something different. They will need the civil service, but they will not like to maintain the status quo. I thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for that. We thank you for staying within the time. Let's quickly get our final panelist to take the podium. Professor Ahwoi is a legal and governance expert. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. When I got the concept paper from the organizers and I looked at the title, I thought that they had the wrong title. Because the issue really is not the role of the civil service in the execution of the president's mandate. The issue is the role of the presidential staffers. The civil service is there. It is a constitutional body to execute the president's mandate. If the president is bringing people from outside to do what the civil servants are supposed to do, then that is where the problem is. It is not with the constitutional body that has been established. So I will change the topic to executing the president's mandate, the role of the presidential staffers. My three previous speakers have all spoken without reference to where the real problem is. You see, the civil service is regulated by the Civil Service Act of 1993, PNDC Law 327. The local government service is regulated by the Local Governance Act of 2016, Act 936. But there is a Presidential Office Act, which is regulated, there's a presidential office, which is regulated by the Presidential Office Act of 1993, Act 463. And that is where the problem is. All the suggestions that have been made, they are true, but they are actually covered under the Presidential Office Act. Except that it is an act that is so bad, but presidents have found it so useful that nobody has talked about revising or amending the act. The function of the presidential office is to provide the president and the vice president such services as they may require for the efficient and effective performance of the executive functions of the president and vice president under the Constitution and any other law. That is all their function. Now, if you don't take you will interpret this so broadly as to cover everything that the civil service and the public services do, because all of them are assisting the president and the vice to perform the executive functions of state, their executive functions. So the function assigned to the presidential staffers is so vague as to amount to duplication and overlap. The idea, because I was part of the team that drafted that act, it's one of the first acts that we passed, the first government of the Fourth Republic. The idea at the time was that when advice has been tendered or options proposed by a civil servant or a member of the local government service, the presidential staffers will check for their consistency with the president's vision, his program, and the party's manifesto. It was never the intention that the presidential staffers will substitute the bureaucracy and then the technocracy. It was never intended that they will compete and rival the civil servants and the members of the local government service in their roles for which they have the requisite qualifications, training, knowledge, expertise, and experience. Now, if you look at the features of the presidential office and all the people they've been describing, they've all been appointed under this act. Because outside of this act, the president has no other appointment powers apart from those contained in the Constitution and in the other laws. The president is the one who assigns duties to the presidential staff. This is in Section 3. The number of presidential staff and their ranks and grades are determined by the president. They hold office at the pleasure of the president, otherwise they have the same tenure as the president. Their salaries, allowances, and facilities are determined under Article 71 of the Constitution, and so on and so forth. There are many problems with this act. First, there is no limit to the number of presidential staff that a president may appoint. And that is why this problem has arisen about numbers. No matter the number that you appoint, a president is acting within his powers. The only limitation is that he must announce or report the number that he has appointed to Parliament. But there's no upper limit to the number that he can appoint. There's no designation of the offices to which the presidential staff may be appointed. There is no indication of the ranks and grades to which the presidential staff may be appointed. There are no qualifications for the persons who may be appointed presidential staff. The lack of security of tenure of this staff constitutes them into a special category of political public officers who are outside the civil service and the local government service. They are therefore not subject to the disciplinary and other regulatory codes that other public officers are subject to. And the absence of the definition of the executive functions for which the presidential staff are to provide services, as I said, creates serious overlaps and duplications between their functions and those of the civil and local government services. Now, these problems create the following, or have the following consequences. First of all, it can lead to what is called a polycracy, which is an overbloated government. When a government is made up of too many people, you get what is called a polycracy. It can also lead to profligacy, which is an excessively expensive government, because an overbloated government is necessarily an expensive government. It lays the foundation for nepotism, which is a government of relatives. It is also a recipe for cronyism, which is a government of friends. And it is a recipe for patronage, which is the government of the sponsors of the president's campaign. It even leads to what is called a kakistocracy, which is a government of the unqualified people, because there are no qualifications for them. So these are what have had the adverse morale. When I listened to the gentleman, I didn't get the impression that they were completely averse to the intrusion of presidential staffers. I got the impression that they were worried about the numbers, and because I've been there before, sometimes they are worried about the qualification and the capability of the people who are appointed to either work with them or to substitute for them. But there's an important merit for this act. It is this. It enables the president to carry into his government members and staff of his campaign team, many of whom have no qualifications whatsoever. When a president is a candidate, he has a very large team that he works with. Security officers, drivers, cooks, hangers-on, choboi people, all of them. So they work with him sometimes for 4 years, sometimes for 8 years. When he gets elected, without this act, technically all of them get cut off because the state takes the president over. And from a human point of view, it is very, very difficult to terminate somebody who has helped you enter into office in that manner. So this is the law that enables a president to transit his campaign team into, office as president. Now, so it is not bad. But from the little analysis that I have made, it points to only one direction. In fact, Prof made a point. When he said that we must have, a cap, maybe we should allow some people to go with the president into office. All that is true. But what it means is that we must revise Act 463 along the following lines. We must put a limit on the number of presidential staff that a president may appoint. We should have a clearer and more precise definition of the mandate of the presidential staff to avoid the overlaps and the duplication with the mandates of the national bureaucracy and technocracy. Parliament must enact an LI to determine the offices, the ranks, and the grades of persons to be appointed presidential staff. There should be a more rigorous procedure for the appointment of presidential staff. Because once you step into that office as presidential staff, many of them handle material that is more sensitive than what ministers and civil servants handle. But there is no system of vetting, of making sure that indeed these people are not security risks. Some of them may be, etc. We should decouple the method of payment of the emoluments of the presidential staff from those of Article 71 office holders. And then for flexibility, and especially to accommodate the campaign team members, maybe the president should be allowed to appoint a limited number of presidential staff under the Act 463 arrangement, but for the rest, some qualification and some of the other things that I have said should be spelled out. And maybe in the president's annual report to Parliament, we should require him to justify why certain persons have been appointed to certain positions. Before I want to conclude by making reference to another law that has also created the problem that has worsened the problem that Mr. Kojo Mpiani talked about. And this is the Presidential Transition Act of 2012, Act 845. This was signed into law by late Professor Mills. The way it has been interpreted has had a devastating effect on the security of tenure of public officers generally. Instead of the objective of ensuring the security of tenure of public officers, the section has achieved the opposite effect of providing a framework for the insecurity of tenure of public officers. What Professor Adei recommended actually is in that law. There is a section 14 in that act that says that lists the persons who come and go with presidents. Unfortunately, there's a section 14.1 which was drafted in a way that was not anticipated. The original draft, and again I know because I worked on it with Justice V.C.R. A.C. Crab and Nana Tudati, was that a category of persons who would go with a president were persons appointed by the president or a minister as members of the board of directors of statutory boards and corporations. Unfortunately, when the law came out, this is how it read. Persons appointed by the president or a minister of state as members of statutory boards and corporations. The section has been interpreted by the 7th government of the 4th Republic to mean that every member of the board of directors, as well as all members of staff of statutory boards and corporations, cease to hold office on the assumption of office of a new president. Using this interpretation, the government has undertaken the following actions since January 2017. It has dissolved the governing councils and boards of all public tertiary institutions and regulatory bodies. I was chairman of the University of Ghana Council. The council had been in existence for only 6 months. The new government came, they dissolved it. Meanwhile, only 4 of the members of that council are government appointees. The rest are all institutional representatives. But not only legal, all public tertiary institutions the boards were dissolved. It has been used to remove from office chief executives of the following and many other organizations. In fact, the list is so long. So he talked about 2. I have about 30. Ghana Cocoa Board, Volta River Authority, ECG, Food and Drugs Authority, Ghana Revenue Authority, Ghana Investments Promotion Center, Ghana Free Zones Board, National Communications Authority, Gaming Commission of Ghana, Head of the Local Government Service, Ghana Civil Aviation Authority, District Assembly's Common Fund Administrator, Ghana National Fire Service, National Petroleum Authority, GMPC, Ghana National Gas Company, National Health Insurance Authority, Ghana Tourism, very long list. If we don't do something about this provision, what it means is that effectively we have politicized every state institution in this country. Because if we live with that interpretation, it means once a new president comes, he can sack anybody at all. And I don't think that was the intention at all. Now, the constitutionality of that section and the government's action on it, I know, has been challenged in the Supreme Court. And the matter is therefore sub judice. So I don't want to go into the merits and demerits. But my own view is that the act should be amended by reverting to the original wording of the draft bill so that we know that it is persons appointed to boards of directors by the president and by ministers who are affected, and not everybody else who is working in the public service. Above analysis and recommendations are made to respond to the following critical requirements of democratic governance. It is to ensure separation of powers, checks and balances, avoidance of conflict of interest, transparency and accountability, the cost of governance, especially in a developing country, and then security of tenure of public officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Professor Ahwoi for that. And I guess the questions would start flowing so much on our minds this evening. Thank you, panelists, for what you have delivered this evening. The floor is now open, and I can already see a hand. The microphone should quickly get to him. Wherever you are, just raise your hand, your name and the organization where you're coming from.
Hello.
Let me give the first chance.
Hello. Okay, good afternoon. I would like to thank our speakers for the erudite submissions. My name is Nyamiche, level 300 day law, Gempa. The fundamental issue, it seems, at this point is that of trust. And that would be between the politicians and the civil service. Well, at a certain point, it begins to be clear that it transcends the limits of just these two parties. In a country where there's no center as to what we want, development-wise, it's only natural that ideas will float left and right, and everybody who gets the mandate would seek to do whatever he wants to do as quickly as he wants it. And I'd reference the concept of unitization in oil and gas, where you have small, or I'll say pooling, small tracts of land, all on one reservoir. Then you have so many entities drilling. What you have is that the well will not be managed effectively. That's the net effect. So the response of the government would be, get all these as one tract, and then we give you a license, and then all of you operate it. Under one, you have one well, and then everybody gets going. You share the profits on pro rata basis. Isn't that what we should be looking for? Getting an idea as to what we want as a country development-wise, and then having our political parties think about how best to get there so that at least there's a center. And then we can continue the discussion from there. And then we can look at perhaps making our civil service a lot more efficient, and then we can move from there. I think at the root, there's a problem already. And if we tackle the problem at the branches, we're not getting anywhere. Thank you.
Because of time, we'll insist that you direct your questions to the panelists and then be short as you can so that we can have as many questions as we can before we go. We're live, and so we are monitoring the time we're using here. Madam, you can go ahead. Your name and where you come from, and then direct your question to any of the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Vera with Moromi Initiative. My question is, when at what point did we get it wrong as Ghana? That I want to direct it to the four of you, but yes, at what point did we get it wrong that government's work is not for your father, and so there's this attitude at the workplace when you go and you start working and it's like, it is government's work, get up and let's go, it's time for you to close. And then to Professor Ahwoi, my question is that at the local level, we have various ministries, agencies, representatives at the local level. But you go and there's no resources for them to work. Some of them want to go out and they say there's no even fuel, there's no vehicle, there's no this. And sometimes it's all about the district, the chief executive director. Or director says this, chief says that. So resourcing civil service at the local level, whose responsibility is it? Who is to ensure that at the local level we are working there? Because if it is indeed that the politicians need the civil service to go ahead with their mandate, it means that we need to really tackle the local level. That is where rare development starts from. But that is where you go and nothing seems to be happening. Thank you very much.
All right, one more question and then we'll get the panelists to answer them. Please, let's have the microphone down here. Okay, please, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I've been listening to the panel members.
You didn't tell us your name and what.
I'm Francis Loco. I've been listening to them very attentively. It reminds me of probably when I was in P6. Africa without Madagascar. It's like a soup without salt. It means that we cannot practice democracy without law. And without law, democracy is no way. And if I listen very carefully to Professor Ahwoi, it means that it is the law which governs the presidency, the presidential staff, right down to the civil servant. What do we see? This will come from within and not without. So if we don't establish trust from the presidency down to the civil service, we will not be going anywhere. We will never be going anywhere. There will be a lot of infraction between the presidency or the government and the civil servant. And what will now come is that tomorrow you are sacked for challenging the minister. Tomorrow you are sacked for challenging the presidency. This is where we are now. And it is true. Reference to what Professor Ahwoi just said, a whole lot of lists. Government comes, you are sacked. Government comes, you are sacked. We are being frightened. But what will be the next government? Am I going to be sacked? Don't forget, my son, my daughter, your brothers and sisters, they are all there. What will be the position of all these people when the new government comes in? Okay. So there is no stable in the system that we are now. This is where we have to draw the attention to the government. My next issue, I wouldn't have raised it, but
okay. So you're not asking questions, you're raising issues.
I'll raise the question at the last point.
Okay, then if you can wrap up for us. So that.
Professor Adei, we raised the issue of the Minister of Finance. I would not to, argue on that point. But I remember in 1971, Professor Buzia, the Odumasi farms issue, where J.H. Mensah was a director. You know at that time, Dr. Agama, lawyer Okujeto, Majite, and then to that of the Buzia's time, we have the J.H. Mensah. In that case, the matter was against J.H. Mensah because he didn't disclose when he was a director to Odumasi cocoa farms. Exactly. This was an issue between government at that time, which is Progress Party, and the opposition, which is the NAL, led by Bedema, and then he was kicked out by Article 71, or whatever it is. And then Majite took over. You see? So the issue that we saw here is raising concern. Is it true that we have violated the laws that regulate the mandate of the presidency? That's all about.
Okay, so that's your question.
Then the last question is, then my last question. Do we have anything like general order? If we have, what is the difference between the Civil Service Act That's what I want to know.
Okay.
If not, thank you very much.
I'm grateful. If we can get these questions answered quickly, Professor Ahwoi, you had one. Professor Snavda, if you can quickly answer the last question and then before we go to Professor Ahwoi.
Well, with regard to whether a law has been violated or not, I'll leave it to the lawyers. But when somebody violates law, you go to court. So that one, I wouldn't. The general orders which existed at the time of independence, unfortunately, is no longer there. That was, we had the Blue Book, general orders, and I think that this is one of the reasons why, especially the young civil servants who also have not gone to training, are almost at a loss. And I think that it's high time that a scheme of service training, which will also be based upon a set type of basic rules of do's and don'ts, be established. When you go, there's the civil service ethics, there's the civil service code, but these do not have the same level as for the general orders. If you violated it, you are in trouble. We don't have exactly the same now. So, but it's nice to hear about. There's no doubt at all. I think that there should be a new law which will deal with the balance of the need for the president to have a certain team, there's certain numbers, and the qualifications. And I mentioned it, and he articulated it even better, because things are getting worse with time. And even though he mentioned 2, there were more than 2 at that time. And they got worse and worse. So it's not a matter of how many you have been able to count. And I think that they are not good. Especially, and I wouldn't mention when and where, I've seen middle-level officers being asked to go. For me, I'm worried about the top, but also middle-level officers getting a letter to say, hand over to this and proceed on leave. And I think that there's a time. Unfortunately, our constitution doesn't allow even private members bail. So we are in a dog in a manger situation whereby only the executive. And I think that I'm not a lawyer, let alone constitutional lawyer. It's a misinterpretation of the issue that, you cannot introduce a bill with financial implications. And I believe that there are some of them which has no financial implications. And the fact that both sides of the House are hoping when it will be their turn to use the same provisions, and there's a need for a civil action. Thank you.
All right, I'm grateful. Mr. Adei, if you can quickly come up stage here. We want him to give us a closing remarks. We're going off air now, but we'll be here to take the questions. Our viewers at home will need to just wrap up the show. So, Mr. Adei will give us a closing remarks. You have just 1 minute to do that, and then we'll go off air, and then we can stay here for...
Well, thank you very much. Right. Okay, so on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and also the Institute of Law and Public Affairs and the Media General, I would want to thank all of you for attending upon our invitation for the 4th edition of the Accra Dialogue. And a special thanks to our distinguished panelists for sharing with us their individual thoughts and perspectives on this particular matter. We thank you also out there at home for watching and being with us on social media as well. And watch out for the next Accra Dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Mr. Adei and our viewers on TV3, our listeners on 3FM and all other affiliates across the country. We're grateful for your time spent with us. The Accra Dialogue will come your way once again. My name is Bright Nanafu. Thanks so much for watching, and good evening.
As a center of development, Unfortunately, the 7th government